Hello everyone, welcome to this virtual GDC session about Substance 3D. A few weeks ago we did a big release, the new Substance 3D collection and new Substance 3D texturing plan, part of Adobe. We released the new version of Painter with a lot of power boosts, improvements in performances, and improvements in quality of life. It's been well received because like a lot of we've never had like so many active users. In fact, we beat our records of active users, so thanks for this. We also had designer entering a new world of parametric meshes creation, which is huge, and we're very happy to see a lot of people starting to embrace it and create incredible stuff with it. We also have a sampler, which is formerly known as Alchemist, which now lets you it's a complete remodel of the tool, and it lets you create materials very quickly and very efficiently, but also now it lets you create these IBLs on top of materials. So this is a very significant major release for sampler. Also, we had the Stager, which joined the family, which is a rendering tool. Hopefully you see the quality, the special quality of the renderer on Stager, and the ability to very quickly stage environments and create beautiful images of your art. And we hope we see more like game art being displayed using Stager. And let's not forget about the content. We released a huge library of content, formerly known as Substance Source. It's not a Substance Assets library. Is really big now, and it's not only made of materials but also meshes and environment lightings. And these environment lightings are absolutely unique. You can control each light in the environments, and they're very well done. And so to stage quickly your creations, it's amazing to use some of the tools. So we'll show you some of that, and most of that actually in the demos following me, and you will see a lot of very cool stuff. At the end of the session, you also have a little bit of a surprise. So stay tuned and stay with us. And in the meantime, I'd like to show a few assets. You know, I like to do that every time I do a conference. I like to showcase the artwork of the community, and this time I want to showcase a special list of users, the art of a special list of users, which are our VIP beta program that we worked with for more than a year, working on this release. We work with a very talented artists like Pablo Munoz Gomez, Zhilong Xu, Ronan Mahan, Anthony Carlion, Anna Nater, and more. And so the first one is this material test by Ronan Mahan, which is absolutely amazing. And Ronan has been focusing on this new Adobe standard material definition. We introduced this standard material definition to allow for new type of materials with a lot of new properties. And this is a good example of using these materials in conjunction with the new renderer that we integrated into Substance Stager, and will be eventually integrated into more places. But speaking of materials, Pablo Munoz Gomez, this rendering here has been done in Stager as well, and it's called Working from Home with Kids. I love it. And in this one, you can see this special plastic material that actually most of the artists we provided the tools with, they loved and they used extensively, and they couldn't stop rendering it and applying it into objects. That material here is special, and you can see it here as well. It's been used by Anthony Carlion, again here rendering done in Stager. And you can see on that machine this soft plastic being applied again. It's interesting to see how many examples of these we've seen, and how good it looks. Right? It's as simple as that. A lot of effort has been made in like making sure the renderer is efficient and at conserving energy. The subsurface scattering is very, very well defined as well. It's a really very, very advanced renderer that we have here. This example by these two examples from Anna Nater have been rendered in Stager as well, and they're from a series called Chill. Again, here is an exploration of the materials, always very poetic and very expressive in the works of Anna, who is an awesome artist and one of the early adopters of Stager. And it's also great to see people like Clément Boursier like using Stager to create this type of images from what they created in that case in I think it was in Houdini and 3D codes, and painted in Substance Painter and rendered in Stager Beta. About Designer and the fact that Designer entered a new world of parametric mesh modeling, mesh creation. And these are good examples from Luc Chaberla and Céline Dameron from the Substance team. They created these paper creatures randomly. So it's a generative process that creates these little creatures. And each of them is unique because if you change the random seed of the process that we've been describing in one graph, in one of the Substance models graphs inside of Designer, you create different realizations of the same process. And these are 4 different realizations of the same process that have been done in Designer here. And then colors have been applied more or less randomly, and you can create these variations of paper beasts somehow that are awesome. Speaking of awesome, Sinolai, again, also working in the Substance team, has been creating these parametric meshes of 2 roses and the grass blades, and you can control like the way the petals are spread out, how many of these blades of grass blades you want, how many of these roses you want, what size of them, etc. And you can really go crazy with it. Different mood, different atmosphere, and different tools as well. This character here has been by Pablo Munoz Gomez, an awesome artist, has been rendered in Stager as well. So it's good to see this type of, I would say, game art and VFX art being rendered in Stager directly, so you can create these images and share that on your portfolio. This is amazing to witness. So that's it for this little showcase. You'll be able to see now more demos of the tools, but right now it's time to go to Jeremy, starting the demos. All right, thank you.
Let's first talk about content. Content, and especially Substance source, has always been a big focus and a big part of the Substance ecosystem. Just this past year, we've added thousands of new materials, including collaborations with the best material artists in the industry. Pierre Fleo built a steam engine and all of its materials, complete with intricate hard surface details, knobs, and levers. We had a terrific pirate theme dropped by Eric Wiley, featuring heavily stylized materials with bright colors and a true sense of depth to them. And finally, Vincent Desrosiers contributed as well with beautiful drop paying tribute to Colombian architecture. A few weeks ago, with the launch of our new offers, we renamed Substance Source to Adobe 3D Assets and expanded the scope of the library by adding more than 2,000 3D models and 60 parametric environment stages. Let's talk a bit about the model first. Each model has been hand-modeled following a strict series of guidelines to ensure the poly counts, topology, and UVs are consistent across all assets. The library ranges from kitbash pieces like mechanical or weapon parts to standard props, all the way to complex structures and buildings. All these models are game ready and can be used by any project, whether personal or commercial. Finally, parametric environment stages may be less useful in a game context, but are much more interesting when creating images for your portfolio, for example, or for 2D UI renders. Each environment stage has been created from real-life studio setups and includes a parametric IBL as well as high-resolution backplates. Each light source in this IBL is customizable, meaning you can change the intensity and color of any light source independently. Finally, Substance Share is now called Substance 3D Community Assets, but the platform remained the same. Any asset uploaded and downloaded can be used in any project, including commercial project, without any strings attached. Now let's take a look at Painter. This new update of Painter has some really cool new features, and the first one is the Adobe Standard Material, the ASM. And this new material model is something we developed at Adobe to share between all our different 3D apps. So Designer, Painter, Stager, and Sampler all use that same shared material definition. The specifications are actually going to be made public so that any other third-party app who may want to support or use the ASM can do so if they want to. If we look at the settings in our shader, you'll see that now by default in Substance Painter that ASM Metal Rough is the one that's selected by default. You can of course keep using your own custom shader or any other shader if you want to. But here's all the parameters we have here. So we'll have the coat parameter now, allow you to have clear coats on your material and only on some parts of it. Well, before it was a separate material that you had to use separate shader. We also have sheen, and you can see some of the sheen here on the hat. You can see that kind of small reflection on the edges and on the cloth as well that really sell that fabric look of the material. Next up, we have, if we go down a little bit here, our subsurface scattering. We improved our subsurface scattering model. It's now called Redshift Reality. You can still use the skin or translucent model if you want to, but that new model is the default. And it adds some very nice parameters to fine-tune the way skin especially looks inside of Painter, Stager, and all the other apps. You can, of course, one of the main things you can do is choose the scattering color. Before, our scattering color was just a uniform color, and you had a black and white mask to choose how much scattering you wanted. You now have access to a scattering color. You can choose either to use the albedo by default to drive that color, or you can have a specific scattering color channel that allows you to paint the actual color of the scattering locally. And you can also use the translucency map to choose where the scattering is going to go. On top of that, you got a global scale for the scattering that tells you how far the rays go inside of the objects. And we have two other parameters that are already made to be able to fine-tune skin very easily. The redshift allows the red rays of the light to travel further in the skin, making it look a little more red tinted. And the rayleigh parameter, that's the same with a more orangey look. So these are things that you could totally do if you were authoring your own scattering map. You could just make those little color shifts manually, but those two parameters are kind of a shortcut that allows you to get that really nice looking skin without having to spend a ton of time building a very complex map for your scattering. And finally, here at the bottom, you can see we have an isotropy here as well. Again, that was in a separate shader before, so you can actually create these nice anisotropic surfaces like hair or metal. And the last one is edge color, and that allows you to create very subtle coloration on the edges of metals, especially to get a much more natural look. And that's something that really adds a lot of realism when rendering inside of Stager, for example. Now let's look at the necklace here, and we actually want to add anisotropy to that necklace. Right now it's just a plain metal, so let's see what we need to do this. So the first thing we'll want to do is to add the right channels. Right now we don't have those channels in the texture set, and that's because by default we're not adding all the channels of the ASM, because it would just make your project very heavy for probably channels that you may not use. So let's add those channels. And the first thing you'll see here is that you now have the list of channels has been reorganized, and you only see the channels that are compatible with your current shader, and you have the channels underneath in the specific categories that are not compatible with your shader. So it will work the same no matter your shader. And in here we're going to use the anisotropy level, anisotropy angle, and another thing that's cool is you can see the user channel here. We used to have 8 user channels, we now have 16. So I know there was a big request to have more user channels when using specific custom shaders, and that's not the case. So now we need probably anisotropy level and angle. And let's put our anisotropy level to the maximum, and we have that nice anisotropic effect now on our color. I'm going to use a texture here to make it even better. We have this nice anisotropic noise that we can use. So let's use that anisotropic horizontal noise here. And I'm just going to change a few settings in here. So let me see what we have. I'm going to go into the noise parameters and rotate it 90 degrees, and then choose that Y amount by resolution setting. And there we go. We have a nice kind of brush metal anisotropic necklace here. So that looks pretty good. So now let's look at the next big component of this new release, which is what we used to call the shelf and is now called the asset panel. The first thing you need to know, and since we have new installers and a new app name and new folders, you will have to migrate your content to these new folders. So look at the documentation. There is a content migration page that'll tell you where to put your assets to make sure they appear in your asset panel. So the asset panel, we already went through a very deep redesign. We're not happy with the state of it. And we really wanted to just make something that's easier to use, easier to access, easier to navigate. And the first thing that we wanted to do is to make sure that it works vertically and horizontally. Typically, with the way the shelf was built before, the only way to really put in the UI was at the bottom, where you would have this very wide viewport, which is not ideal. We're working on props and characters. So now the UI adapts based on the size of that window. If it's very narrow or if it's not, you can have it full screen on the second monitor, can be vertical or horizontal, and it's always great to use and easy to access the different functionalities of it. The second part is you used to have that list of categories that were kind of built in and hard coded in the tool on the sides. A lot of people wanted to get rid of those to just have only their own, and it was not really ideal to filter assets. So what we did is we came up with this set of icons at the top that allows you to very quickly filter material, smart materials, smart masks. We get effects here. We get the brushes, the alphas, textures, and lighting. And you can very easily just filter those by type. You can also use Control if you want to filter multiple types at the same time. We have material and smart materials at the same time here, for example. And it just provides an easier way to get access to your asset. The other aspect of this is you now have that window on the side that you can remove or not, where you have the path to go through your hierarchy, and you have a new way to navigate as well at the top here with the breadcrumb. And this allows you first to choose which shelf you're going to look at. Right now we're looking at all the different libraries and shelves. You can choose to only look at one, which is a new feature that's really useful, especially when you have multiple shelves for multiple projects and you only want to search into one of those. And you can also use this to navigate without having to go through the hierarchy on the side. So I can actually look at my breadcrumb here and see my path. I can hide the hierarchy, and I can now use the little icons and the labels in the breadcrumb to quickly navigate through my different folders. You can see that some of those are grayed out, and that's because those folders don't have any materials. Right now I'm filtering only materials, so that shows me where my materials are in my library. I can again easily just filter to the exact asset that I want. So that's very useful. And of course, we'll still have those safe searches. So those that list we had on the side here, it's still there. So if you like that system and you want to create your own filter, you can still easily do so. So for example, here, if I want to, we had that hard surface category. I want to get that again. I'm just going to choose textures, type hard surface, have all this filtered out here, and save this as a new save search and call that hard surface. But it's now fully customizable. We don't have anything that's built in or hard coded or anything like that. So this was a big request to be able to re-customize that the way you want it. So another feature that we added here is really an improvement is on the way we generate normal map from height maps. In Painter, you use the height map all the time. It's easy to edit, to blend, to modify, and then we generate the normal map from it. And until now, the method we used to generate that normal map introduced a little bit of blurriness, and the normal was not as sharp as it could be. So we now added that new sharp method to generate the normal map. And here what I'm going to do is I have these fibers in the height map that I have on my layer here. I'll just zoom in a little bit and look at what it looks like. Okay, this is the normal map we get here. And if we switch to the normal channel, we'll see that this is the result we get. It's it's good, but it may not be as sharp as it could be, and it's a little blurry. So if I go in my texture set setting, I now have a new parameter to change the height to normal method. And by default it will be sharp now, but the smooth subtle method is what we were using until now. If I switch to sharp, you'll see that I now have those fibers that are much, much sharper, and I get much more detail. And so on those fabrics and fill layers where we have a lot of small details, you'll get a much more accurate normal map generated from it. Same thing with hard surface. If you just painting or stamping very hard surface and hard edges height maps, you'll get a much more accurate and much sharper look to it. So by default now we all use all the texture sets use the sharp method, but if you like that kind of softer method we used before, you can always switch back to it. And that parameter is basically per texture set. So you can have one part of your asset that's hard surface that use one, and maybe the other one that's more organic that use a different. All right, we're done with our model here. I just want to thank Sylvester Dorgu very much for giving us this model to play with Painter, Stager. It looks amazing, has a lot of character, and it was a pleasure to work with it. So now what I want to do is render this into Stager, and so we now have this new button on the side here that allows us to send our asset to Substance 3D Stager. So if I click this, what it will do is it will export everything, all my texture sets, all my textures, my model, and any shader parameters that I've set up. It exports all that and it imports it automatically into Stager. Right now it's exporting. We have a lot of 4K texture sets in here. I think there's about 15 different 4K texture sets. And now if I alt tab to Stager, we'll see that model starting to open here. So while the model finishes loading, let's kind of look at what's new in Painter. We have that new asset panel and faster thumbnail. I didn't talk about this, but the thumbnails generation and loading are now faster than ever, 3 to 4 times faster. And there is also a new option, actually a new environment variable that allows you to set the cache for the thumbnail to be much higher than the default. It was fixed to 512 megabytes until now. You can set it to much higher so it doesn't cycle through the cache when you have tons and tons of assets. It makes everything so much faster. There's a new Adobe standard material that we looked at, support for anisotropy, sheen, and clear coats. You can now send assets and resources to and from Painter. We showed that we can send your whole scene to Stager, but you can also now send SBSVR from Designer to Painter directly and from Sampler to Painter as well. We have that more precise height to normal conversion, and we also have support for UV tiles for the automatic UV generation. That means that if you have a model that you want to lay out UVs on several UDIMs, you can only do that now. You can tell Substance Painter, I want 10, 15 UDIMs for this asset, and we will lay out the UVs automatically across those 15 UDIMs. There is new content, actually not in Painter itself. We didn't want to bloat the installer, but if you go on the community asset platform, formerly Share, you'll find around 50 new smart materials that you can bring into Painter to start working. And finally, we have an extended localization. We added some languages like French and German to the app. All right, now let's go back to Stager. All right, we're back in Stager now, and our model has finished loading. First thing you can see is that everything came from Painter right back into Stager. Our textures, our model, our shader parameters are all here in Stager the way we left them in Painter. So we don't have to set up anything. Everything is already set up for you, which is a huge time saver, especially when you have a model with tons of textures like this and tons of materials with specific parameters. So of course, in Stager, we can adjust any of those further if we want to. The goal of Stager is really to give you an environment where you can very quickly get to a final render by just adjusting a few parameters, dropping some light in the scene, potentially dropping some props and environment around, and you're done. So here, let's select our face here, and we can see that we have all the settings for our material. All the maps came from Painter, are plugged in the right slot with the right settings. Same thing with all the other shader settings. The subsurface scattering settings also came in with the distance and the redshift and everything that we set up. And of course, all these parameters can be modified further. One thing to keep in mind about scattering distance is it works best with high poly meshes and lower scattering distance. If you use a very low poly mesh and a very high scattering distance, you may see some faceting appearing. It's actually a limitation that we're currently addressing and that we'll release in a future update of Substance 3D Stager. All right, all our materials look good now, so let's get to the next phase. Next up, we want to add some lighting to it. And so you can see in the shelf here, we have models, all the starter models you can play with and build scenes with. We have materials, of course, and these are just starter content. So you can create your own material, bring in your own material if you want to. And we have lighting. And lighting plays, of course, a big role inside of the Stager workflow. And you have access to all these different environment lights. And if we look at our background here, we can set up our background to be an environment, so we can see how it looks like. This is kind of default studio-looking environment that we use when you open Stager, but we can switch it to anyone we want. So let's go back to our kind of neutral background and try a few environment maps. So I can click on any of those that will be applied in our viewport, and I can just look at the results in real time here in the Path Tracer. So what we want to do here is not use one of these pre-made environment map. What we want to use is one of the cool features of Substance 3D Stager, which is that you can bring any image as a backplate and generate lighting from that image. And so I have that nice night sky image, night city image. I'm going to bring it as a backplate, and it will automatically create a camera for me. And you can see that in that camera, I now have that backplate as a background here. And I can, of course, add depth of field and adjust different settings on the camera. But what I want to do is create lighting from that camera and also have that camera match the size and the ratio of my image. So I'm going to set that to the image ratio. I want to generate lights from that image. And I do not want to match the perspective. I'm actually happy with the way my model is framed. So I'm going to uncheck that and click OK. And so it's going to take a few seconds. And now Stager is kind of looking at the image and generating an IBL for us. And there we go. So you can see that the frame, the ratio is right. The IBL is here, but it's very dark just because this is a night sky, a night scene. So by default, that IBL is going to be very dark. So we can go in and kind of pump up that value here to maybe 600%. And now we have that nice lighting with the purple. We can see the pinkish and the blue parts on the sides. I may just want to rotate it a little bit so that the purple is on the right side, on the left side here, and the blue light coming from the right side. That looks already pretty good, but we need some more kind of intense light on that face to get really the nice reflection on the skins and on the pores. Just setting up the pose a little better here, and let's try to get some better lighting in here. So and the lighting here, what I'm going to do is add stuff to this environment map. And so we have those environment lights set up like that 3-point light here that will basically add lights into my environment map. It's not adding lights in 3D space in the scene. It's really baking down new light sources in my environment map. So when I click on this, you can see that it creates new layers in my lighting. And you can each light, you can change the color, the parameters, the position, the size of it. You have plenty of controls over how this all works. Right now we have a little issue where it's a little slow when we're in path racing mode, so I'm not going to change any of these lights. It actually looks pretty good the way it is, but we're working on improving the speed here. I'm going to rotate it just a little bit to make sure I get the right lighting, the right reflection in the eye and on the cheek. That looks pretty good. And maybe I want to add another additional light just to get that additional little blue tint on the side. So I'm going to drag and drop that light in, and this is just simple point lights. I'm just going to move it in the scene where I want it to be, and I'm just going to set that to like a blue color to get that additional little blue tint on the side here. Change a little bit the exposure to get a little stronger. Adjusting a little more the light here until it looks the way I want it. And this looks good. So my final step here is I want that background to be blurry to have a nice depth of field effect. But that background right now is not part of my 3D scene. It's just a backplate on my camera. So using depth of field on the camera is not going to give me the blur that I want. What I can do though is go on my camera and go on that background image, and I have a little edit icon here in the option. And what this will do is it will bring up Photoshop, and I can now edit that background image in Photoshop. I have all the tools of Photoshop at my disposition. And I'm going to go into my filters in here and into blur, and I'm going to choose lens blur. and I can get that cool bokeh effect on the image using the lens blur in Photoshop. I can adjust a few settings here, maybe a little higher radius. That looks good enough. I can click OK, Control S, save my file, and it's going to take a few seconds to update in Stager, and we'll have that nice blurred background. And now I'm pretty much done with my render. It looks really good. I can now either save that, just click the snapshot of the image that I have here as a PNG so I can export it to wherever I want. Or if I want to, I can go in the render tab, and here I can select my camera. And you can have multiple cameras, and each camera can have a different resolution, different backplates, different ratio. I can have all my camera listed here, and I choose which camera I want to render, choose the quality settings, and hit render. And that may take between 30 seconds to a couple of minutes, depending on the complexity of your materials and your scene. But in this case, just waiting about 10 seconds, 15 seconds in the viewport is actually probably good enough and gives me the render I want. Now let's switch to Designer, and Wes is here with us to show us an amazing demo of the new parametric modeling graph in Substance 3D Designer. Go ahead, Wes.
Here is the parametric asset we are going to walk through today. This asset and scene was created by Luke, and I'm going to simply walk you through his creation process. To begin, we focus on the base silhouette with very simple shapes and clean topology. Then a library of detailed shapes was created for scattering and warping onto the base mesh. After setting some distribution rules and snapping constraints, we end up with a very detailed model that you can see here on the right. We start in Substance Designer by creating a Substance model graph, and in the package, two categories are created to represent the silhouette and the details. Then all of the meshes that will be used are imported into the package. All of the meshes used for the silhouette are then added to the Substance model graph. Here, collections are being created from the imported assets using the select node. We can then swap between these assets using the select node source parameter. Then, using some bounding box constraints, we can start stacking the parts of the tower using the stacking node. In this case, we are stacking everything on the y-axis so we can construct the base mesh. Here you can see that switching from one part to another, the silhouette is still working. Next, curves are extracted from the base mesh. You can define the amount of curves you want to extract and the axis that will be used. Here, the Wrap Along Edges node is used to wrap a generic wood plank along the extracted curves. Now we can adjust the size. The Scatter on Curves node is used to scatter the slate model along the curves we extracted earlier. In this case, a spacing constraint is used so that there are more slates at the bottom of the roof and less at the top, so that it fits the base mesh. The final touch is adding a bit of rotation using a transform node so that the slates are aligned to the base mesh. Next, we can merge the assets together and add a bit of randomness using the Jitter Instances node. With the jitter node, you can add random rotation on each axis, and you can define some ranges with a minimum and maximum value. To create holes in the roof, we are extracting a point cloud from the base mesh using the Mesh Sampler node. Here, a value of 10 will work for the number of points that we can use. Next, a primitive is scattered on the points using the Geometry Instancing node and the Primitive 3D node. A sphere is used for the primitive to easily control the size using a radius value. Using the Collision Pruning node, we can use the spheres as a volume to remove some of the slate model instances. If we now increase the radius of the spheres, we get fewer slates scattered on the roof. To visualize how the spheres are used as a volume, we will use a merge node to view the spheres with the roof. Here you can see all of the exposed parameters. The rest of the tower was created using this same kind of process, such as extracting curves, scattering geometry on the extracted curves and along surfaces, removing instances, and so on. By changing the base mesh, we can get a different final asset. Since we are dealing with instances, you can create many variations inside the 3D view with millions of faces. You can also use iRay to launch a ray tracing preview at any time in the modeling process. You can export the mesh from Substance Designer as an FBX or OBJ model file. Before jumping into Substance Painter, we go to Blender to repack the UVs using the UDEM convention. Once in Substance Painter, we can start baking maps as we are using smart materials. For this asset, we are focusing on an unpainted wood toy, so we will use a wood smart material. Using the geometry mask, you can easily isolate parts of your mesh. It's a very easy and visual way to create groups. And then by using some procedural noises and mesh-based maps such as curvature and ambient occlusion, we can start creating some new smart materials. Here we are using various masking effects to create edge wear on the roof slates. Here you can see the creation of smart materials for the slates, the metal, the wood, and the walls. The reason for using smart materials is so that we can reuse the materials on the procedural variations we created for the mesh in Designer. Now that we have all of the smart materials created, we can very quickly retexture the second variation of the tower using these smart materials. You can create some very different type of assets using substance models, such as these paper creatures. The final look of the paper creatures is driven by a single random seed value. As you can see, we can jump from our model graph to our material graph and tweak the parameters at the same time and in the same environment. It's very convenient if you are already used to creating substance materials. Here you can see the parameters for the tree generator. For this asset, everything was generated directly in the substance model graph using curves and some distribution rules. No geometry was imported. I hope you have enjoyed this walkthrough of the substance model graph. Here, once again, you can see the final scene that Luke created.
Thank you so much, Wes and Luke, for this amazing demo. Just a little recap of what's new in the new version of Substance 3D Designer. We'll of course have this new Substance Models authoring graph. And it's the first version. There is so much more we want to add to it, but we're so excited to see what you guys are going to come up with this new feature. We have the new Adobe Standard material again, same as in Painter and Stager, with this new isotropy, sheen, clear coat, translucency, surface scattering options. We have the ability to send and update assets from Designer. You can send an SBSCR from Designer to Painter, as I said earlier. The cool thing is that once you send it once, you can send it multiple times and the asset will update in Painter. You don't have to manually re-import, create copies like it used to be the case before. Once that thing is sent once, there's a link that's set up between the two apps, and you can update them, which makes it very easy to iterate on assets that are made for Painter, for example. We updated the SBSAR publishing flow. Publishing is easier. You also don't have to save your SBS before publishing. We just made it a little more user-friendly here. We have new ray trace nodes, and I invite you to look in the documentation. There is some really, really cool-looking nodes, including a radiance map and ray trace ambient occlusion nodes inside of Designer now. And again, as in Painter, we extended the localization to French, German, and Chinese. Next up is Sampler, and Guillaume has a really cool demo showing us the latest feature coming to Sampler, formerly known as Alchemist.
Hey there, my name is Guillaume Meyer. I'm a technical artist at Adobe, In this short demo, I will introduce you to the new features of Substance 3D Sampler. We design a more flexible interface. On top, you will find the resolution of your project and you can work with non-square ratio images. On the left, you will find the project window with the material section and the environment lights section. We will see the environment lights workflow in the second part of the demo. You can also discover the starter asset content with the materials and the filters, and you can filter them by type or display them as grid or list with this button. You can discover also your assets. You can drag and drop images, material and custom filters over there. Okay, let's create a material with one of my images. I will drag and drop the image over here and use it as a bitmap. If you don't like the layout of the windows, you can move around the panels. You can also optimize your working space by stacking some panels. Okay, let's see one interoperability feature. You will be able to send your image to Photoshop by right-clicking on its thumbnail and click on Edit in Photoshop. It will open your image and here you can do any modification you'd like. I want to crop my texture and then I will click on Save. It will automatically update my image into Sampler. Now we can drag an image to Material AI powered to create a PBR material out of this texture. Here we have a rough result of a carbon fiber. Let's see how we can increase the quality of the material. We will rotate around the cube to have a close-up view of the material. Then we can tweak the medium details and the large detail of the material to increase the quality of the displacement. We can adjust the geometry equalizer to have an even result and decrease the delighting intensity. Okay, my material is starting to look good, but still it's not repeating well. As you can see, it's not really well tiled. To correct that, I can drag a tiling filter. When I'm doing this type of operation, I like to visualize only the 2D viewport. You can type in the tiki to make your material repeat on the viewport. Okay, let's crop the sides of the material to align them. Then you can recenter the transformation. Now we will realign the top part with the bottom part of the material. And again, you can recenter the transformation. Now you can see that we have alignment issues with the fibers. To correct this type of issues, we added two different filters recently, the Perspective Transform and the Warp Transform. Let's see first the Perspective Transform. The trick is to put it just before the tiling, and then to move around the pointers to realign the texture. As you can see, you can easily realign the left and the right part of the texture like that. Then we can retweak a bit the transform of the tiling, and then we can drag and drop the Warp Transform. It will display a pointer grid on the viewport that you can move to warp the textures. Like any filter in Sampler, it will tweak all the channels together. Okay, so let's move now the pointers. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to realign the top part with the bottom part of the texture. My trick to tile well a material is to use the Perspective Transform on the side part of the material, the left and the right, and on the bottom part and top part of the material, I'm using the Warp Transform. As you can see now, my material is well aligned, but still I see some artifact due to the tiling. The seams are not going into the right places. To correct that, we added two features to the tiling filter. The Show Seam to display the seam, and the Use Mask to move around manually your seam. To use it, click on Use Mask and then click on the brush icon. You can modify your brush pen size and pan around with the Alt and middle mouse button. Then you can just paint wherever you want the seam to go. You'll see that this feature is really helpful with structural materials, like bricks for example, but not only. Fabrics, carbon fibers, metallic grid panels, but it can also help you to tile organic materials like leathers, woods, rocks, or grounds, where you will be able to move around the seam into the interstices of the bumps. Okay, so we are finished now with the seam and the tiling should be good now. So we can deactivate the Show Seam and go into the 3D viewport to visualize our tiling. You can see that with all these operations, my material is tiling well. Okay, let's tweak now the shading properties of our material. We can drag the fill layer to fill in some of the channels. As you can see now, we have way more channels to play with within Sampler. If you go into the channel settings, you can activate anisotropy, coat, sheen, and specular edge color. Okay, so let's begin with the metallic, putting some metallic on this material, and then some roughness, like that. And then let's put some anisotropic level, like that. We can also activate the anisotropic angle, but we need to specify some areas. So we will do it later with the color replace. So now let's activate a coat opacity to 1 and a coat roughness to 0.1, let's say, and a coat normal. And we can plug a custom coat normal over here. I just generated a scratch normal map within Substance Designer. I can just drag and drop it over here. Now we can visualize some scratches and we can lower down the opacity of the map to decrease the intensity of the scratches. We can also put the displacement to 0 because we have a flat coated material now. Let's specify the anisotropic angle map now. We will do it with the color replace. We need to split the vertical and the horizontal fibers of the material. Let's drag a color replace filter and then let's switch to the base color map. You will see that you have a pointer at the center of the map that you can move around to select a color area. You can tweak the mask range luminosity or color to increase or decrease the selection area. With the mask smoothness and the range smoothness, you can offset the selection area. When you're happy with your split selection, you can go at the top of the filter and activate the advanced segmentation. Your mask will be extracted from the base color, but you can replace the information in the anisotropic angle channel. We can switch back to the anisotropy angle map to visualize the result. In the anisotropy map, you need to have a black area equal to 0 degrees for the horizontal fibers and a 25% gray area equal to 90 degrees for the vertical fibers. And that's it. Now we have an anisotropy angle map. Let's increase the tiling of our material and let's review it now. In Sampler, we decided to split master technical filters like the adjustment into small, easy to use filters. The brightness and contrast filter is part of them. Here I'm tweaking the base color, but I could choose another channel to tweak. For any normal operation on your material, just typing normal into the search bar to find some normal filters. With the normal height adjustment, I can decrease the normal intensity. Well, I think my material is finished now. I just want to use it in Substance Painter. We are bringing more interoperability in the Substance ecosystem, so you can send directly your material in Substance Painter. If Substance Painter is open on your desktop, you will find your material on the shelf. You can see that the shading properties of the materials are kept in between the two applications. Anisotropy, coat, and scratches are kept. In the material section, you can see all the imported channels. We created a new PBR standard shader called ISM to simplify the material transfer in the Substance ecosystem. Okay, so we covered a lot of material features in Sampler. Now I want to show you environment light workflows in Sampler. I will click on my project tab and here I can add a new environment light. A new layer stack is created. I can jump into the viewer settings and change the default textures. Now I can see my environment. Here I have a set of panoramic photographs captured by a Ricoh Theta camera. I can drag and drop them in Substance Sampler and select HDR merge. Your environment will be imported. You can set its exposure directly into the HDR merge filter. Another useful filter is the straighten horizon. It will open the 2D viewport and you can select the environment map. You can also type in the T key to disable the repetition. Now you can move the 2-pointer to align the horizon. Now another issue that needs to be fixed is the tripod. To correct that, we can drag a nadir patch. With the 2-pointer, you can adjust the area you want to patch. You can also turn around the sphere to better visualize what you're doing. Now our tripod is replaced by grass. Make sure that you deselect the show frame helper at the end. We'll finish our environment by dragging a color temperature filter to correct the color tone of our environment light. Okay, we are finished with the post-processing of our HDR image. We can now send it to Substance 3D Painter. Again, if Substance Painter is open on your desktop, you will find your environment light selected into the shelf. In one click, you can light your assets with custom environments in Substance Painter. Okay, I will conclude my demo here and enjoy the rest of the show.
Now let's talk a little bit about the ecosystem around those tools. In this new update, we can now send data back and forth between these tools. As we said earlier, we can send data from Designer, SBSAR from Designer to Painter and Sampler. We can send assets and scenes from Painter to Stager for rendering. And we can send IBLs from Sampler to Stager or from Sampler to Painter as well. Another big component in this is Adobe Bridge, which may not be a tool that you've used before as a game artist, but Bridge is basically a library management tool that can handle thousands and thousands of assets. And it now supports SBSAR, which means that you can browse your SBSAR in Bridge. You'll see all the thumbnails. If there is no thumbnail, it will actually create one for you. And you have access to all the metadata of those SBSAR. The label, author, identifier, tags, all that you can see for each SBSAR, and you can edit actually in Bridge without having to open the SBSAR on the text file or something. So it's really, really useful, especially managing large libraries, large repository of materials. I'm thinking it's going to be very, very useful for studios moving forwards. And there's one last thing we want to talk about today, and is that Substance 3D loves Blender. We actually have a lot of artists internally using Blender every day to build the content you see on the website and the blog posts. Adobe researchers there use Blender every day as well to help them in their projects. And we've been wanting to give back to that community and be more active in that community for a long time. And we're very happy today to announce that Adobe is joining the Blender Development Fund, and that we have 2 plugins that are available today as beta. One of them being Substance support in Blender, being able to bring in your SBSAR and tweak them directly in Blender. The second is a Mixamo plugin. It allows you to bring in Mixamo animation and automatically create very cool control rigs for your characters in Blender. So first, we're going to have a cool demo of the Substance plugin in Blender by Wes. Take it away, Wes.
Let's dive in and take a look at how we can use Substance materials in Blender. So I'm going to come over to Edit Preferences, and you can install the Blender plugin just like you would any add-on in Blender. Here you can see I've already done this. And we have a few preferences that you can check out. So we have one option here for automatically attaching materials to selected objects. We'll take a look at that in just a bit. We also have a setting here for the relative data path. This is going to allow you to set the location of the generated Substance assets that are going to be relative to the blend file. Then here you have all of the outputs and the naming convention for those outputs. So for example, if you look at the base color, it's going to be looking for the name of the output to be base color or any of these names. And this is here in case you are working with Substance Designer and you're creating your own special outputs. You can actually name them here, and the Blender plugin will be able to pick that up and hook up the appropriate connections, depending on how you may name your custom outputs. So with this said, we have the plugin added and ready to go. And so now we're going to take a look at how I can use some Substance materials to help texture this asset. Now, this asset was created by my coworker, Casimir Perez. And here in the shader editor, you can see that I have a new Substance 3D tab. This tab will also show up here in the 3D view as well. So we'll take a look at this again in just a bit. If you need some Substance materials, you can access Substance Share, which is our community sharing site for Substance materials. All content on Share is free to use. You can also click this button to quickly access the Substance 3D assets. So here, if you need to go and browse for a particular material, you can do that as well. So that's what I've actually done here. I've gone through and I'm actually going to be using this rotten wood, and I can just download this Substance material and use it directly in Blender. So now that I have my Substance material, I can come over here to this button, which is going to load a Substance material file. So we'll do that. Here again is that rotten wood SBSAR. This is the material that I want to use. And I'll click to load the Substance material. So here in the first part of our properties window is where we can see a list of all the loaded SBSAR files that we have here in our blend file. You can also access this by using this keyboard shortcut, Control-Shift-U. Now here in the top right, we're going to have some controls for attaching this material to the object. And that's what I had hinted towards when we were talking about the preferences. We can have this set to automatically attach the material to the selected object. So I have that off. So what I need to do is just come over here and click this button. So I'm going to click the button, and here we can see that the Substance material has now been attached as a material to this object that I had selected. Here in the shader editor, I can see the material and the Substance group that has now been created. So if we take a look here at this group node, and I'll hit tab just to jump into this, we can see that we have a series of Substance textures that have been generated by the plugin. and are now being fed as inputs into the BSDF shader here within Blender. Now, using the graph and substance parameters, I can go in and start to make changes. So for example, this resolution is pretty low. Let's go in and just set this to something a little higher. I'm going to set this to 1024, and you can see that my resolution is already changing. So now I'd like to actually rotate my textures to match the orientation of the UVs. So I can do that here just simply on my mapping node. I'll come over here to the Z axis for my rotation, and I'm just going to set this to 90 degrees, and that will set the correct rotation here for the texture. So now I have the substance material, it's applied, and now we can start taking a look at playing around with the various parameters here. So here we have this outputs. So these are the outputs that are actually connected. And if we want to disable one of these, you can just click this button here and you can see that it essentially just turns off that connection to the shader. So I'm just going to re-enable it. I definitely want to have that on. And under parameters is where you're going to start to see the parameters that were exposed as part of the substance file. Let's take a look at this color. And I'm just going to drop the color value for this just slightly here. And then I can start to play around with some of the parameters like this rotten area amount. Let's just increase this a little bit. Let's play around here with the rotten area opacity. So I can just drag this up a little bit. And here we go. So I'm just making just a quick variation change on this substance material. Since this is coming from the Substance 3D asset site, you'll also see this technical parameters. So with this, you can do some image editing. Like for example, if I wanted to maybe increase my luminosity, contrast, maybe desaturate this texture slightly, I can do so here. Now you'll notice that we have this presets drop down. And at the recording of this video, we can't see the presets that are embedded in the substance file. But what you are going to have is always this field for custom and default. So for example, if I set this back to default, this is just a really quick way to get back to all of the default settings of that substance material. Notice that my resolution dropped all the way down here to 256, and all of my parameters are set to default. However, since I have this custom, I can always jump back to the custom tweaks that I've done to my material to get right back where I was. So with the object selected, we'll come over here to the materials. You can see the rotten wood materials now available to me in my material index. And if I wanted to assign this to another object, like let's just say really quickly, I select the roof, I can just come over and browse my materials to be linked and just link that rotten wood here to the roof as well. So I'm just going to undo that. So let's say that I want to make a variation of the material that I add. Now, of course, I could add another material. If I just click here, I could load another substance material. It's going to show here in my loaded SBSAR's window. However, in this case, I'd like to maybe make another variation to this rotten wood. So with it selected, I'm just going to come over here and duplicate the selected SBSAR file. So you can see here that it creates this rotten wood 1, so another version of this. Now, if I like, I'll just come over here to the roof. And in this case here, I'm just going to use my attach SBSAR button. So we'll attach it. And now this material or this duplicated version of this rotten wood has been assigned to the roof. Now I can go in and start to play around with some of the settings here. So again, I have all fresh parameters. So let's maybe go back to that mapping node, and I'm just going to set that to maybe 90 degrees again. And I'm going to set my resolution back to 1024. And then here I can start to play around, like I said, with my parameters just to kind of get the exact look that I want. So maybe here I'll just change the color. And maybe play around a little bit with this rotten area parameter. So we'll do this. And here we go. So now you can see again in my loaded SBSAR's window, I have my rotten wood. I have a duplicated version of that I've now instanced or linked to another object here in my Blender scene. Now to work with your substance materials, you don't have to be in the shading tab or in the shader editor. Like I said, that Substance 3D tab is going to be available to you in the different various views. So here I'm going to look at my properties, and you'll notice again here we have our Substance 3D tab. So if I wanted to, let's say in a different view, quickly get to my rotten wood 1, this is going to be the material assigned to the roof, and start to go in and tweak some of my parameters, I can easily do that here as well. So you can see here, I'm just going to make a change. Let's just maybe make this like slightly blue, maybe a little bit darker. And here we go. I can quickly make a change within any of the 3D views that I have here within Blender. And that's going to complete this quick look at how substance materials work in Blender.
And now let's talk a little bit about Mixamo. For those of you who've never used Mixamo, this is a web platform allowing you to upload your model, apply animation, and download those models back. So here we're in Blender, and we have our character model. We're exporting as an FBX, and we're going on a Mixamo platform. And here we'll be able to upload our character. So we're going to grab our FBX and simply drag and drop it. The mesh is uploaded, and once it's uploaded, you will have the ability to add control point on the body to tell Mixamo where the arms are and the joints. And Mixamo will process this and create a rig for your character. Once this rig is set up, you can source through the hundreds of animation clips that are available on the website and apply one of these animations to your models. Here we're going to choose an animation. Here's a model animated, and we can now download this model as an animated FBX. Here we're back in Blender, and that's where the plugin comes in. You now have access to a new Mixamo panel in Blender, and in here you'll be able to create a full control rig for your Mixamo character. You just click on control rig, click if you want IKEY on the arms or legs, click OK, and the plugin will generate for you the full control rig, allowing you to modify those animations, create your own animations based on that Mixamo character. You can also download new animations from Mixamo and apply those animations to that same character right through the plugin in Blender. We hope you'll have fun with this. It's a beta, and we can't wait to hear your feedback.
All right, thank you for these amazing demos and the great news. Hopefully you liked the big surprise at the end. And thanks for attending this session. So we hope you liked the content as much as we really enjoy and love creating it. We love creating these products. Hopefully it shows that way to see what you will be creating with the tool. So and if you have any questions about your subscription, how to get a free trial, please contact our support team. There is an email address called contact@substance3d.com. We hope to see more of your art soon, hopefully. Great, thank you.